I'm Paul Van Squike, your Taekwondo guide, and this is Topic Tuesday. Did you miss me last week? You know, I actually recorded an episode last week, but I listened back to it and I didn't like it, so I threw it away. But this week, we will have a Topic Tuesday. If you're new around here, the concept is simple. People leave me comments, they leave me questions about Taekwondo, and we talk about them. This is a good thing to listen to while you're doing your chores, while you're driving to work. You know, today while I was doing my chores, while I was cleaning the dojo, while I was eating my lunch, I was thinking about how to present this topic. I still haven't come to a great place on the matter. And as you know, with Topic Tuesdays, I don't really script these. I just do my best to discuss them. I often listen back and kind of am a little bit embarrassed at my either poor choice of words or mix-ups. But I'm going to do my best here to try to get at a large theme, a meaty topic for today. This comment comes from James SM1LH, who writes, if your school has, "We are a black belt school," written on the wall, it's a McDojo. Black belt is not the goal. Personal development is the goal. Belts are just steps along the path. Kids should not be black belts. It's a false sense of security. Instead, have kids focus on getting better as martial artists and as developing humans, not belts. If you can't do that, then you're not a martial artist, you're a scam artist. I find this comment incredibly interesting because to me this comment seems like it's confusing two different philosophies together, or it's not philosophically coherent, I guess is what I should say. It seems like it's embodying a clash that's happening right now in the West between Christian morality and what you could call a Nietzschean philosophy, or even a Greco-Roman, perhaps, philosophy, and I think those two intermix a lot of things. So how do I get at this? Well, let's start out with why we do martial arts. I think how the general public would view a martial art, or a sport for that matter. Let's say you're coaching someone in competition and they give their best effort. They showed up to all the practices. I mean, they're a great person. They've done all the work they need to do. And they lose their match. Are you upset with this person? Do you tell them that they didn't do the right thing by competing? Did you tell them that they failed because they lost? No, usually what's said is something like, hey, you gave it your all, that's what's important. Win or lose, that's not the important thing. It's that you gave it your all. This is what people say to their kids when they do sports as well. What we say is that it's about the process of character building rather than the outcome of the event itself. I would say that in martial arts, the purpose originally didn't even involve the sport aspect of it. It was more of a strictly spiritual practice, and the sport component is simply a way of amplifying that spiritual practice. Now, what do I mean by spiritual practice? Because that word gets thrown around a lot, but without a lot of depth to it. And so I really had to kind of think about that and parse it out. So, without invoking religious ideas of actual entities, God, these sorts of things, what do we mean by spiritual practice? Because a secular person will use that term as much as a religious person would in the context of martial arts. And I think what it gets at is that the purpose of the practice is to refine the self. It is to win the battle within yourself. So the war is not with your opponent on the mat. It's with your base instincts that we need to temper. Every day we face temptations that lead us to places that aren't great. Could be, we can consult the 7 deadly sins. It's a lovely little source for vices. Could be gluttony. I mean, who is not faced with the battle of gluttony from time to time? Overindulging on something, right? It could be pride. We're constantly battling our egos. It could be lust. Could be a lack of fitness. You could link that to sloth, which affects your health. So you're using this practice, the practice we call martial arts, to give you tools so that you can practice defeating what I'll just call these base urges that arise within you. These parts of your personality that lead to self-destruction. That's the battle. Martial arts is a practice that helps you program yourself to achieve victory against that lower part of yourself. I think that's what we mean by spiritual practice. That's why it doesn't matter when you compete and you lose to someone, because it's not about that particular match. It's about the process of how you get ready for that competition and the process of dealing with the discomfort, the challenge of stepping into the ring and fighting that person, or stepping into the ring and performing a pumse. So you have to have discipline to show up to your training regularly, to put the work in, to build the physique you need to be competitively viable. So you're developing discipline from that standpoint. You have to develop the self-control to gain a handle on your nerves, whether you're doing pumse or sparring. But gosh, to me, there's not a lot more frightening than getting into the ring with someone and doing a full contact fight, even if it's something like Taekwondo where you're not punching to the face. It presents a real challenging situation to overcome. So the point is that you've overcome the situation, and that's what will give you the spiritual growth. And it's interesting to me that the term martial, if you use the Chinese character and take the Chinese character apart, it means to stop the spear. That is a very different idea from the English word martial, which derives from Mars or Ares, the god of war. To stop the spear is referencing using force to prevent further damage from being done. In other words, it's about restraint. It's about self-control to a high degree. That's what to stop the spear means. Ares, if you look up Ares, the Greek god, was more of a chaotic figure. Think Viking berserker. There's passion and rage and just raw aggression behind this entity. It got tempered a little bit when it became Mars, or the Roman god of war, because Rome was a little bit more concerned with that imagery of discipline surrounding their war god. Although I will point out that there is also Minerva or Athena, who is the embodiment of sort of a balanced approach to war, where strategy and mindfulness are just as part of much of fighting as the physical and dominating side. But I bring that up just to point out that martial, I don't know if martial is a great representation of a spiritual practice, because not only is it an approach to war that's different from what we preach in our dojans, it's fundamentally about a result rather than a practice itself. And what I mean by that is this: if you are a warrior who is defending your country from invasion, That's not a spiritual practice. You need to stop your country from getting invaded. The cost is very likely the death of yourself and your family, or the domination of your family. Results are what matter there. You don't tell a warrior, it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game, right? You tell them, go win. Now, of course, there's some gray zone there. We obviously are inclined to want to fight ethically still. But if it's a matter of defense where you're being attacked maliciously, well, you're sort of entitled to use any means necessary to stop that aggressor because they've violated a lot to approach you in that way. A lot of their own morals, I should say. So it's a totally different matter from, say, a competition where the goal, again, is not the winning, but the goal is the forging of character that occurs in the preparation of the match, and in the match itself, where it's about how you respond to the pressures of that environment. And that's what shapes your character. So if we look at this comment, it's talking about black belt like black belt means you can fight. And I think the person who wrote this is a BJJ practitioner. Now, if you don't know, in BJJ, you really can't get a black belt without being a very, very competent grappler. So I would say if you're a black belt in BJJ, you probably can fight. Now, the other thing about being a black belt in BJJ is it takes a very, very long time. It's more akin to being a master level Taekwondo practitioner, like a 4th or 5th degree black belt. And you'll actually see a lot of people run BJJ schools that aren't even black belts. They're purple belts, brown belts. So it's not even necessary to run a school to be a black belt in BJJ. That doesn't mean, first of all, that we need to take that standard and apply it to all the other martial arts. That standard developed independently of what black belt means for something like karate or taekwondo, where I don't think it necessarily has ever equated to fighting skill. If you're equating your rank to a fighting skill, that's a little bit more martial, right? That's less to stop the spear and more about the result rather than the process. Now, what makes this comment interesting is that James also says that the belt is not the goal. So, in other words, the outcome of being a competent fighter is not the goal if we're equating black belt to being a good fighter. Personal development, this is a direct quote, personal development is the goal. Belts are just steps along the path. So he's saying giving a kid a black belt gives them a false sense of security. To me, that means that by giving someone a black belt, what you're saying to them is, you can win a fight. Well, that's not how it works in most martial arts outside of BJJ, which, again, I would strongly emphasize that there's never a guarantee that you can win a fight. You give someone a black belt in BJJ, I know they're going to be very good at grappling within the context of BJJ. That does not at all give them any kind of guarantees as to being able to win a fight. But the higher theme here is that the winning of the fight is not the goal of the practice. The goal of the practice is the spiritual component, the refinement of the self, the winning of the internal fight, not the external fight against person A or B or C. Everyone has the ability, I would guess anyone who's sound of mind anyway, to win the internal fight. That's the goal of martial arts. It's the goal of religious practices. That's why I say martial arts, first and foremost, is a spiritual practice, because the goal is to win the fight over our lower selves, whatever you want to call that. I'm trying to use secular terms here, right? So James is acknowledging that, but then saying if you give someone a black belt who is a child, you're a scam artist, not a martial artist. Well, to me, the black belt has never been about one's fighting ability. It's a symbol of progress in a system that is designed to aid oneself spiritually. Now, does a black belt mean that you've completely conquered your base emotions, your sinful nature, whatever you want to call it? No, of course. We all struggle with these things continuously. It's simply a symbol of the journey that you've undertaken that says, I'm working toward conquering these things. I'm working to better myself. And of course, in our art, black belt has never been taught as something that symbolizes mastery. In Taekwondo, for example, fourth dan and up is considered to be a master. So if you're concerned that a black belt has to have this tremendous amount of skill, well, they should have a base level of skill, certainly. They have technical proficiency in the system to some degree, but it's not a mastery level. In my school, it represents 4 or 5 years of training is typically what that represents. That is not a master level of skill. I do not have "We Are a Black Belt School" written on the wall, so I'm not defending this notion necessarily. I do have black belt children. Again, I've talked about that. That was the last episode. I don't think having "We Are a Black Belt School" written on the wall is any way an indicator that a school is a McDojo. I have a whole episode on McDojos. I don't think there are actually very many of them out there. And nobody actually agrees on what it is. A lot of people will, and again, you can look at my old episode on this to go in depth with it a little bit more, but a lot of people will call something a McDojo if it just has a technique represented that they don't think is a valid technique. So you could see a really highly competent Aikido demonstration featuring extraordinary athleticism, extraordinary command of the system of Aikido. And someone who does BJJ might think, well, that's not going to help them win a fight in the setting that I practice fighting, therefore that is a McDojo. Or they might think that's martially, from a war standpoint, useless material, therefore that is a McDojo, even though they're performing the material at a high degree of confidence, or with a high degree of confidence. And competence, I should say, not confidence. Competence. They're doing their stuff competently. So I don't think that's a fair assessment. The only time I've ever pointed a finger and said, that's a McDojo, and I won't use the name of the organization, though, is where, and I carefully try to use my words here, because martial arts schools, most of them, the ones that last, that are institutions, they do have a business component. They need that to sustain themselves. I put a lot of time and energy into my students. This is my full-time job. It is important to have instructors paid for their work. I mean, obviously, I'm in a position where I'm going to say that. But I don't think there's anything wrong to having a strong business model for your dojo. It just keeps you around longer, if anything. But there's a line to that. And when you start just viewing your students as dollar signs, and you're willing to sacrifice your teaching quality in order to boost your profits, and so I guess what I'm saying is that you're studying your clientele, and you're giving them exactly what it is that they want in a way that strips it of its actual utility. And I don't just mean fighting ability, but its utility as a spiritual tool. It's like the equivalent in the martial, or the equivalent of selling someone pornography. It's not a ethically sound business. You're just selling something exploiting a base urge of your fellow man. And in this case, they're exploiting people's desire to have proficiency in fighting in martial arts. And what they're actually giving them does not give them spiritual tools, does not give them fighting abilities, does not give what is advertised. It entertains them. It keeps them in the system, spending their dollars as entertained clientele. It makes them feel good about themselves. But as we know, if you want to grow spiritually, you have to undergo a lot of challenging things that are not comfortable. A McDojo will not put their students in uncomfortable situations. It will always make them feel good. Not because it's a reward for doing something difficult, but because it's their job to entertain their students so that they spend more with them. It's the drugs of the martial arts world. Again, I don't think there's very many of those. Most martial arts instructors are teaching because the martial arts profoundly helped them in their own lives, and they want to share it with other people. This is something that exists in some of these big chains that exploit the base urges of humanity for profit. That's what I would call a McDojo. It doesn't have anything to do with the techniques you're teaching, not necessarily, or the business model that you're using. It's about the spirit in which you are presenting the martial arts. Is it truly about helping people, or is it about bringing in dollars? So yeah, he uses that word, I think, haphazardly. And this comment to me, I can't remember, I started this over a couple times because it's such a difficult thing to approach. But I was saying, to me, it's the clash of two philosophies. This Nietzschean worldview, which is about the will to power, about, he writes about surpassing good and evil, basically leaving behind the moralities that chain you down, in his words, or his line of thinking, and becoming this higher form of humanity, which he calls the Übermensch, a more evolved form of humanity, kind of the same idea that existed in the Greco-Roman world of dominating your opponent, that the base reason we do things is a will to power. And Nietzsche used this term slave morality, which he applies to Christian thinking, because Christianity, on the flip side, is all about serving others. And that, of course, the reason I bring it up in this context is that the service mentality was the core of Western values for a very long time here. You could say the last nearly 2,000 years at this point, that those Christian values usurped the Greco-Roman values that I think overlap a lot with what Nietzsche said. Nietzsche lived in the 19th century, and I think his philosophy is the philosophy of the modern age, at least of the atheist atheist way of thinking in many cases. And so there's a clash right now as the atheist way of thinking rises and the Christian way of thinking declines. There's this clash between these two narratives, which one says victory is what matters. The domination of your opponent and your strength, your will to power is what matters. And the other says self-control is what matters. Refinement of the spirit is what matters. And I think, interestingly, that the Christian morality aligns more closely with the Asian way of thinking about martial arts, particularly in the modern world, using the term Wu or Mu in Korean to stop the spear. It's not Ares, it's not Mars, it's not about passionately dominating your opponent with your rage and strength, right? It's about self-control and only using force to stop someone from harming others, essentially. Very different things. So if we can, I think we would just come a long way if we could view martial arts first and foremost as what they were intended to be, in my opinion, as spiritual practices. Then the fighting part is secondary. You don't have to be such a... Be careful what I say. I think a lot of these people mean well, but if we view it as a spiritual practice, we're not so concerned with the function of things. We're not saying, gosh, what's the point of doing that knife hand chop in your form? We're not obsessive over every little detail of a person's practice. We're concerned more so with their development as a person. And very few of us need unarmed combat skills for winning in a warlike situation. You've heard me talk about this before. I will say I do think it's important, especially for men, just because men are very likely to be confronted with some sort of physical altercation in their life of some kind, to have some sort of combat training, unarmed, specifically combat training, under their belt. Now that could look like a lot of things. It could look like wrestling, could look like Taekwondo, could look like point karate, boxing, MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think they all do something important, and that they show you how hard it is to fight, especially with your bare hands. And when you know how hard it is to fight with your bare hands, and you kind of know what that's all about, I think you're less likely to get into a violent altercation altogether. And you understand what's at stake when someone gets in your face with their ego all inflated. You understand what's at stake if it goes to blows. So you're going to be more confident in those situations, and you're going to be more likely to de-escalate them, in my opinion, if you have some sort of combat sports experience. Now, beyond that, if you need to hurt people, weapons is the better option. If you're actually concerned with the martial side of things, the war element, the victory in conflict. Because, yeah, if you're attacked on the street, it's not like competition where you go, doesn't matter if you win or lose, it matters how you train. No, it matters that you survive, right? It's an outcome-based situation. Well, those self-defense type situations, as I've said before, they're always, you're always better off if you're able to be armed. and so I think the training needs to look very different from the sort of combat sports unarmed training that we like to engage in, that I think, yes, it has a place for your practical everyday living, but first and foremost is about a spiritual development in the same way that playing a sport is. Though I think martial arts is a much longer-term solution for this kind of practice. Point being, if you play football, there's no utility to it that you think you're going to take out into the street. You're not going to say, I play football or I play baseball, therefore I can dominate a person in context B. And I think that needs to be the approach we take to martial arts, more so than the utilitarian approach of this is used to defeat another person in a martial, warlike situation. To stop the spear. And the first spear to stop is the spear within, the spear of our lower selves, our sinful nature, refining the self, developing self-control so that we can overcome our base urges. That is the purpose, in my opinion, of martial arts. So, James, I don't know if you're going to listen to this or not, but I don't know how you feel about that. I'd be curious your response there. All right, we'll do one more topic from Daryl, my producer, 2023. Daryl, 2023 writes, Thanks for such a cool reply. This is in reference to the last one about the knife hand chop. I found the video of the pimp who has seen better days. Looks like it's good to bet on the vagus nerve, which is the target for the knife hand strike in many cases. Although for better defense-only viewers, the channel isn't promoting to start chopping more than the veggies. Daryl, I see what you did there. The instructor clearly shows self-control. And any stories that martial arts training proves self-control that you feel helped or heard of helped a non-martial arts situation, perhaps overcoming an emergency or possibly another element of TKD that overcame an emergency, example, leadership. Yeah, isn't it funny how much that relates to our first topic? To me, the trickle-down effect of spiritual training is kind of hard to identify because it enters into every situation you find yourself in. It's when you train the self, when you train yourself spiritually, then that changes the lens in which you see the world, and it changes the way that you respond to the world. So you could say that every single thing you do is affected by martial arts training, spiritual training. For me, that makes it difficult to pinpoint a specific example where I can say, I achieved that because of Taekwondo. Outside of maybe running this business, because if you haven't seen my video about how Taekwondo saved me, I talk about how difficult it was to start a martial arts school. I went like 7 years without much of any income for myself. And so there's certainly an element of perseverance that you learn from martial arts, and I don't think I ever would have achieved success from a business standpoint without going through the gauntlet in martial arts that taught me perseverance, so I might attribute that. There's a story that stands out in my head of someone who stood up to their bosses, a female who stood up to their 3 male bosses when they were trying to, I'll use the word again, stand up for a client. So they attributed their martial arts training to being able to non-physically confront their bosses and do what was right for their customer, their client. But I think it will trickle into everything that you do. So again, hard to pinpoint exactly where it will help. That's all I have for topics this week. Sorry again about your lack of a Topic Tuesday last week. But let's keep the ball rolling. Get down in the comments section. Leave me a topic, something you want to hear discussed about Taekwondo or even other martial arts, and we can talk about them. Until next time, enjoy your training.